All right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Building Campus County Connections webinar series. I'm Celeste Carmichael, Program Development and Accountability Specialist with Extension Administration, and we're really happy that you could join us this morning. I'm going to go through a few logistics about using WebEx, the event program, and then just a couple of notes about the Campus County Connection series before we introduce our special guest, Todd Schmit. So thank you again for joining us. You obviously found us here this morning, and I'm glad. Just wanted to take a moment to say why we have been working hard to send out the notices about these webinars through email, just to say to go to cornell.webex.com, and that is just to get you used to seeing all of the opportunities through WebEx. You probably know that Cornell supports WebEx as a technology, and that's a technology that's available to all of our associations as well as department folks to be able to use to meet with people, to train others, and to host events and presentations like this one today. So we like to lead you to WebEx directly to find the webinars, and that way there's not any confusion about links. So glad that you found us here today and hope that you will try WebEx sometime. I wanted to also just mention a couple of things about the logistics on the right-hand side. You'll see all of your panels. There's a chat panel. If you can take a moment to set that to send to all attendees. So if you have questions, everybody can see your questions, including us. If you have things that have to come directly to just the host, myself and presenter Todd Schmit, then that's fine. But for the most part, it's helpful if everybody sees questions. So if you can send to all attendees, that would be wonderful. We do have a poll here today, so be on the lookout for that, and I hope that you can participate. It's a great way for us to hear what you're thinking about and what kind of things are happening within your own community, and you know, a good way to get your head wrapped around what it is that we have going on in our offering as well. So look out for that poll. Let's see. The last logistic thing that you probably don't see in your right-hand panel but is on mine is a record button. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll post it on the Campus County Connection webinar page, and you can also find it on the Cornell Cooperative Extension Administration YouTube site, and I'll send out that link after we're through. All right. So with that, just want to take a moment to talk about the Campus County Connection webinars. We've been doing this. We're in the middle of our second year now, doing it on a monthly, sometimes twice a month basis, and the whole idea is just to share and increase the visibility of programs and research opportunities and opportunities to more deeply develop relationships between our off-campus staff and on-campus staff and faculty. So unlike some trainings that are really intended to build skills, the Campus County Connection webinars are really intended to build peripheral knowledge, just to help you know what some things that are going on and give you some ideas for opportunities for Cornell Cooperative Extension. So with that, our guest today is Todd Schmit, and our topic is evaluating the economic impacts of regional food hubs, implications for extension programming. We're really excited to have you here today, Todd. I'm going to pass the mouse over here and just ask you to start by just introducing yourself and your work a little bit to all the folks that are on.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I always love talking about some of our research that we do, and particularly the implications it has for extension activities, and hopefully working with all of you. I know a lot of you that are on the call today. I'm an associate professor in the Applied Economics and Management, not department, the School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell. I do work broadly in agribusiness management area, and more specifically looking at ag-based economic development opportunities in the state as well as more broadly. And that gets to the heart of part of what I want to talk about today, looking at economic impacts of food hubs. much of this research is motivated by my own personal research interest in ag-based economic development, and more particularly in an understanding that, and trying to develop an understanding more of what food systems and relocalized food systems can play as an economic engine in rural economies. So there's been a lot of interest both on research side, on practitioner side. You are all familiar with that. Policymakers have increasingly pointed to opportunities focused on alternative food systems. We okay? Great. Hang on one second. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So when we talk about food hubs, you know, while this may be a more newly popular term, certainly the existence of food hubs have been around for a long time. We can think about farmer marketing cooperatives. I do a bunch of work now, increasingly with cooperatives, and certainly there's food hub type activities that happen. You can think about regional distributors as a type of food hub. We are basically sort of following sort of the USDA definition that focuses on the management of aggregating, distributing, and marketing of source-identified food products. They come in all shapes and sizes. There's just a couple pictures here, not meaning to pick out any better examples than others, but just to note that they are very different in size. And what we're going to look at in our research today is on a case study of a particular food hub with an objective of trying to say, how can we develop a methodology to assess their impacts to the local communities or regional economies at which they work in. So I would like to, I guess I could take a couple minutes to note that I know there's a lot of activity going on in the state, some particular projects in western New York and down in the Hudson Valley. We're starting to work on a new project funded out of USDA fundings with myself and Bobby Severson that are trying to look at identifying some of the best management practices and tactics that farmer marketing cooperatives have used in this whole sort of food hub arena. We're starting to work some in northern New York where they're looking at some of the sort of possibilities for food hubs. So the point that I'm trying to make is this isn't going to be a presentation on, you know, food hubs are sort of the answer to in every situation, but it's a focus more on the methodology in terms of how we can assess impacts and the importance in collecting various sources of data for that. So many of you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on sort of why there's potential for food hubs, but because I think I'm preaching to the choir here, except to point out that we're well aware sort of a growing interest for relocalized local food demand, some evidence of consumers willing to pay for more local foods, and the point to distinguish is that sometimes when we think about sort of local foods, we think about the farmer's market, we think about stands, we think about CSAs, but really sort of the majority of local food sales, in fact, quite a bit more, are marketed through intermediate markets, through wholesale channels, through retail channels, through existing distributors. But yet there's really sort of an unmet demand for those types of products in those markets because of a lack of distribution systems, a lack of appropriately scaled distribution systems for moving local foods into mainstream markets, a lack of infrastructure available for, say, smaller and mid-scale producers that want to access larger buyer markets in their sort of local and regional communities. So with all sort of the craze, the popularity of the food hub term and lots of activities going on out there that you're familiar with, we see, support coming from both public, federal, and state level sources. In fact, sort of President Obama, Secretary Vilsack, had established the Know Your Farmer Task Force that actually includes a regional food hub subcommittee. And they created this list of agencies, programs that support food hub development. So we're seeing this increased support on both public and private levels. Am I okay?
Yep.
Okay. Of course, it's not just at the federal level. Many of you are aware of the state support in New York in the last year that recently announced that $3 to $4 million to support new food hub development. In fact, I know Nathan was on here earlier talking about one of those food hubs projects that they were going on. So there's lots of activity going on, and the argument that we're making is that there really hasn't been a comprehensive data-driven economic impact assessment developed or completed to date, or really that there's an agreed-upon methodology on how to do these types, of assessments. So that's really what we're getting at in terms of this project and in terms of the webinar today.
You know, and some of this came from coming and asking, how do we do this? You know, how do we say how many dollars and jobs are being accounted for by the work of cooperative extension? So I know that, you know, when we had talked earlier, there's certainly an interest from administration of how can we represent the work that we're doing in terms of the money that's being made out there. So I think that there's probably a lot of people. That's probably why we have such good attendance on this.
Yeah, we can certainly think, if we have some time at the end, think about this more generally in terms of trying to assess impacts and stuff. It's not. It sounds like it might be an easy thing to do, but it isn't necessarily an easy thing to do given, you know, sort of what the data requirements of that are, or really when you're talking about particular projects in a larger economy and how you're really going to assess what those impacts are.
But this feels like it's a step in the right direction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I guess with that, I really was interested, and this is sort of the poll questions that we were using, Celeste. I was just interested in how much, what's the type of activities that's happening.
So you want to,
sorry?
Are you ready to open
Let me
up a
move
poll?
that over.
All right.
So I'm just really interested in seeing, I'm guessing we have a very captive audience, so I think the first question is that we open up is how many of you are working with stakeholders or clients that are interested in sort of meeting these larger intermediary buyer markets that are interested, not particularly, maybe not necessarily getting together and establishing a new food hub, but are looking at least at how do I work with other producers in marketing my products to intermediary buyers.
So you should see 3 poll questions that are up, and if you can take a moment to answer them to the best of your ability. I think that if you're answering no in the beginning, that you probably aren't participating in 2 and 3, but go ahead and see what's appropriate, and we'll give you a few minutes to respond to that.
My guess is that there's a lot of, I think this is not necessarily something new that you've been working on as well, right? But with the new popularity of the food hub term, this may have been more focused in it. And in particular, in sort of the second question, I'm really curious at what types of activities that you are doing within your association. Is it on the feasibility level? Is it on collecting data? Is it on networking with producers? And just what the types of activities you're doing in the hopes that part of it is I'm thinking in terms of my overall extension programming, how we can, you know, on campus sort of develop better either programs or relationships with you and moving forward in these types of activities.
And if I remember correctly, you have a huge program work team. Is that right? You have a lot of people that are involved either in one capacity or another.
That's right. The Ag Marketing and Community Development Program Work Team, Ag Marketing Community Development.
It's the largest of our PWTs.
Yeah, we actually have a great membership, and it includes campus, off-campus, as well as stakeholder groups that are being part of it, for sure.
All right, so give you another minute to finish up here. It looks like there's a few people in progress and a couple that haven't started, but if you can just take a minute to wrap up your answers, that would be great.
So it looks to me, is this sort of real time, Celeste?
Yes, right.
Coming
so
in?
You can see you've got 26 answers right now and a few that haven't started. But I'm going to close the poll, and that'll give you a few more seconds to answer if you haven't already.
So it certainly looks like, in terms of the responses that, which I sort of expected, right? If you're very interested in listening on this webinar, that you are already working with stakeholders in that direction and through a variety of different activities.
We'll share the poll results. Unfortunately, there's not a great way for you to see this. There you go.
And producer motivations is sort of getting at the last question, which again is sort of a variety there. Are they looking to move into channels to offset existing, not necessarily improving scale, but as many sort of doing that as with scale, getting out of direct marketing. That's interesting. Great. Okay, that's actually useful to me and understand. I mean, my thought was that there's going to be responses in every category, but really it's pretty evenly distributed across there. I find that quite interesting.
So we do have a question that came in,
yeah.
And it says, with food safety trackability requirements, all produce will be source identified. Will that change reduce the differentiation between food hubs and regular distribution systems?
Will it change food hubs? I'm not exactly sure the nature. Let me reread the question again. Right, so we're getting into more of the food safety regulations that are coming down. Certainly, I think in terms of producer or consumers in general wanting to know more about where their food comes from, and in this case from a food safety perspective, that sort of competitive selling point for food hubs could be muted out, but I think I mean, the case within food hubs is more general in the sense of looking at, you know, the geographic location and sourcing of foods. But I think your point is well taken in terms of if the interest from demand from the consumer side is for source identification from food safety, then that's not necessarily going to be one of the main selling points for food hubs moving forward. If it's more from trying with an interest in sourcing locally products to support local communities, those types of generative impacts, then that's a different story. But it's a good question. I think the answer will be we'll have to see how that plays out as we move forward. Okay. So as I said, the overall research question that we were looking to address here is what the economic impact of food hubs are to local economies and participating farms, and trying to develop a data-driven economic assessment methodology to assess this question. It's not looking at a feasibility study, and it's not sort of saying that food hubs are the answers to all the questions. There's a lot more, depending on what your objective are, that needs to be happening in that. This takes a slice of saying, if people are looking at, and what may be part of a feasibility study, for example, is trying to determine what the potential economic impacts are, or of existing activities, trying to define what their impacts might be. I want to make sure I recognize the funding support that we got for this research. We actually worked under a cooperative agreement with the Ag Marketing Service at USDA that's doing a lot of activities with respect to food hubs. I didn't specifically mention at the beginning that I'm working with Becca Jablonski, who many of you know. She's a PhD student in City and Regional Planning, and David Kay, who's with the Community and Regional Development Institute in the Department of development sociology, which were key contributors to this project, and we appreciate the support from their departments as well. We got some NEFA funding that supported some of the research and data collection procedures. Northeast SARE was an important contributor, and we used some interns to collect data through City and Regional Planning's internship program. Okay, so spent a little bit too much time on the front end and want to get into sort of the results. So as I said, the overall research objectives really get at the question of if food hubs have different purchasing patterns than, say, traditional food aggregators or distributors, primarily given their mission-driven approach to purchase more inputs, from local economies, then we should be able to model those differential expenditure patterns and see what the relative effects on the regional economy are, including the impact on local ag sectors. So understanding what information is needed to differentiate the types of producers who participate in food hubs is also significant in understanding what circumstances food hub benefit those or other agricultural producers. So we're looking at promoting this data-driven, replicable methodology and framework that can be applied to a variety of food hub structures. So we want to propose a methodology that I'm hoping others working in this area yourselves can utilize, so we're all sort of talking on the same page. And we want, as part of that, highlight the significant data needs that we need for this type of an approach. We also want to better understand the extent to which food hubs affect the overall demand for and consumption of local products. That is, how do sales to food hubs from farms augment other farm sales? Is this a scale issue? Are producers able to increase their production? Are they looking at shifting sales from one area to another? If it's more of a shift, then as you'd expect, you're just sort of moving from one hand to the other. The impact's not, you're not going to see much impact from that. But if we're looking at scale issues, then that's talking about something altogether different. We also want to look at it on the consumer demand side, and I'll talk about specifically about this, how purchases of food hub products, again, are either augmenting other purchases or increasing the overall demand for those types of products. Okay, so very quickly in how we do this and thinking about what an economic impact assessment is, we're looking at, think about this as a perspective of an existing food hub who, say, for example, receives grant funding to support expansion of their operation. We would think about this as sort of the direct effect. What is known, the initial shock, and what we want to find out through an impact assessment is what are the value of the inter-industry linkages that connect to that. What are referred to as the indirect and induced effects. So if there's this expansion of the food hub, okay, say promoted through a source of grant funds and an exogenous increase, from that, because of that expansion, right, the hub will need to purchase additional product from suppliers. They'll need to utilize, expand on, say, their purchasing or renting of vehicles. They'll need to pay for more utilities. These are all types of additional purchases that are referred to as indirect effects that come from, that are stimulated by the direct influence of the food hub expansion. Okay? So how is it that we evaluate what these indirect industry purchases are to support the increase in final demand or support the increase in output of the direct effect? So if you also think about the expansion of the food hub to support this increase in output, you have increase in purchases to backward-linked industries. You also have employees that work at the food hub that you would expand employee hours, for example, or the number of employees. Those employees then have increased compensation that they then spend in various industries. This is crudely determined as the induced effects. Okay, so the point that I'm trying to make is what we want to do is take from that direct effect, whatever stimulus that is, what is the value of the indirect and induced effects, such that when you think about multipliers that are thrown around all the time, the multipliers are simply that total value of impact divided by the initial stimulus or direct effect.
I'm just going to jump in for a second.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of chatter in the chat box right now about seeing the attendees, and that's one downfall of the event center is you can't see the attendees. So the request was made that if you have a question, that's great. If you can also include in your chat, like where you're coming from, so your county or your I gotta believe you can see the name, but just a name and where your question is coming from, that would be great. But apologize for that. That's just the way the event center is set up. It has some other positives that overcome that little bit of a negative. But go ahead and chat in your questions though, and
great.
I'll stop Todd.
Okay, so this is sort of just trying to wrap up sort of the more conceptual, just to get us all on the same page of what we're trying to do. The point is that we're trying to put a value to all these inter-industry linkages, these indirect and induced effects. And as you can imagine, how you value that is an incredible data exercise. And when we talked about the purchases, you know, the increase in purchases of backward-linked industries, it's important that not only do we want to know what the value, the level of these purchases are, but where these purchases happen. So if that expansion of the food hub increases sourced products from outside of the local economy that you're interested in evaluating, then that doesn't have a local impact because that's leakage of dollars outside of the economy. So it's only local dollars that are contributing to impact. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that when you think about doing these types of impact assessments, that the level of data that needs to be done is significant. We need to understand what purchases are happening and where they're happening. Okay. I'm not going to spend any time talking about the underlying economic model or the software that we use to do this. There's a slide here. The only thing I want to mention here is that basically there's this software and data called Implan out there that utilizing national, state level, and some local data sources basically identifies what all these inter-industry transactions are on a commodity sector basis. So there's, if you can imagine, 440 sectors in Implan right now, and it defines what all those backward-linked industry purchases are based on the data that they collect. The important point that I'm trying to make is we want to improve on what their estimates are because we have local data, okay? So if we collect local data that says we have different purchasing spending patterns, then we can improve the estimates that we have. I'm going to, we're not the only ones that have done this, is the point of this slide, that there's, as many of you are familiar, there's a growing literature on food hubs, but really none have sort of looked at this data-driven impact assessment methodology that we're looking at. Some have looked at it through alternative food channels. The point is they all utilize Implan, but none of them say, our question is, the Implan data isn't always the best, and we can improve our analyses by informing it with primary data collection, which is the contribution that we're making here. And in addition, we need to think about, and one of the things that came out of this project, importantly, is we need to think about opportunity costs. And in particular, what I'm talking about is if we have this expansion of the food hub, okay, we are supporting expansion of industries backward linked from the food hub that supports increased purchases by consumers. Are those consumers actually buying more in total or more in net? is the point. If they buy more from the food hub, are they buying less from other local or non-local sources? And that's important. If they're offsetting other local purchases for the food hub, then again, sort of the net impact is going to be minimal. So we want to be able to identify both informing better data within the model and identifying opportunity costs that really hasn't been looked at. So we use IMPLAN as a base to do our estimates, and while there's 440 sectors in IMPLAN, there isn't one that's called a food hub. So we actually need to create our own sector in there, essentially by identifying the purchasing patterns, how the food hub itself purchases and sells its products. We actually do say, okay, maybe IMPLAN's good enough, and we use the default data that's in there. And then we also customize a farm sector based on surveys that we did with the farms that participate in our case study, and show you what the difference is, importantly show you what the difference is from doing that additional data collection. So we collected detailed financial data from our food hub, which was Regional Access, who many of you are probably familiar with. We interviewed farmer vendors and processors that sell product through Regional Access, and we conducted extensive interviews with buyers of Regional Access products. In lieu of time, because I want to get to the results that will hopefully inspire some additional comments, I'll just quickly say we utilize Regional Access, again, that I think many of you are familiar with. Established in '89, they have about $6 million in sales, 32 employees, lots of product listings, and quite a few, over 600 customers. Again, because of the significant data needs, we wanted to follow a case study. So given that our results, we have to think about the robustness of our results to different applications. So are the results of the Regional Access case study project comparable to this project, this food hub in my local organization, in my local area that I'm interested in studying? And that may be yes or maybe no. It depends on how similar are the levels of activities, what's the economy the local economy that you're defining. The point of the matter is we're developing a methodology that hopefully can at least guide some decision making in doing applications with other food hubs or potential food hubs out there. So as I mentioned, Regional Access provided detailed financial statements, P&L statement that allows us to identify what their expenditure pattern is. Again, this is getting at where do they buy products from, so we can link an expansion of output. How would they utilize an expansion, say, of $1 million in sales? How would they spend that money to their backward-linked industries and employee compensation and et cetera? So this is just a summary of their expenditure pattern. What I want to point out is, as I mentioned before, both the okay. I don't think I'm pushing that right.
Are you trying to get the arrow?
I'm trying to get the arrow. So
yes, there you go.
If you look here at at the particular column, these first two rows represent purchases of food products that they then resell. So cost of goods sold, if you will. So as you'd expect, most of their expenses are in either purchases of what we call food sold farm. This is farm products that they sell, so basically non-processed fruits and vegetables. And then we have the food sold non-farm sector, which makes up nearly 45% of their total purchases. This is basically purchases of processed food products that they then sell as part of their operation. So while 45%, nearly 45% of their total expenditures are for processed food products, essentially, you can see that most of them are non-local purchases. That the red bar is relatively large in that case, whereas in the fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh food products from the farm, most of those products are sourced locally. The important part here is that we need to identify both those types of the location, the level, as well as the location of purchases. We compare, our results are actually quite comparable to a national survey done on a Michigan state recently that showed 61% of expenditures on food hubs were for food and product purchases. Ours is very close to that. The next highest expenditure category, as you might expect, is in employee compensation, so wages and benefits for employees. And again, our survey results are comparable to that national level study. So we utilize these expenditure patterns within sort of our in-plan input-output framework, but then we also said, are the farmers that sell to the food hub unique, or at least different than the default data that we had within in-plan? So we conducted interviews with 30 of their vendors and got detailed information, again, by the types of purchases to different categories and the location of those purchases on whether they were local. And by local, in this case, we're defining this as New York State. We also did, as I mentioned, customer surveys, over 300 surveys with business and household customers. And here, again, we're concerned with whether the demand for buyers represents new demand or reallocations from existing local and non-local sources. So to do this, we did an online survey of about 100 households and over 500 businesses. And follow-up telephone interviews we conducted with the business customers. You can see some of the descriptive stats of the business customers here, and I'll talk more specifically about the output of that in a moment. Okay, so the question is, do the farms participating in the Regional Access Food Hub have differential spending patterns than what we have in sort of the default all agriculture sector data, if you will? And here you can see, if you look at, these are all valuations per dollars of output, that food hub farms in our data set spent 77 cents per dollar of output locally compared to 54 cents per dollar of output in the default data. So instantly we see that, I mean, this is partly as you'd expect, right? These are farms that are interested in selling their products locally, and what this shows is they actually purchase more of their inputs to sell those products within locally as well. They spend more on purchases from other farms. So this is 14 cents per dollar of output is spent on purchases from other farms, either generally inputs, feed inputs, or other inputs from local farms. They utilize support activities, service organizations, basically support service organizations for agriculture. More of that is spent than you see in the overall ag default data. So if we go back to our original conceptual framework, we're now going to say, let's say there's an increase, $1 million increase in demand for regional access food hub products, okay? Maybe supported by an influx of a grant that supports their expansion. We're now going to want to utilize our input-output framework to identify what those indirect and induced effects are. So, drum roll please, going to the results. I know I'm rushing through this really quickly. There's a research report from the USDA Ag Marketing Service has posted online. We're also actually developing a practitioner's guide to say, if you want to do similar types of analysis, here's how you would do it. That's coming out very soon as well. So that's why I'm sort of rushing through some of the process here kind of quickly. But what we found is, in terms of an output multiplier, that is, for every additional dollar of Food Hub output, okay, that $1 million stimulus, okay, for every dollar of that, there's an additional 75 cents generated in the local economy, okay, utilizing our default data that we buy from IMPLAN about New York. If we actually augment that data with data that we have on our particular Food Hub farms, you can see that that multiplier goes up to 1.82. Not a lot, but some. And I think the point is that if we utilize sort of some of the default data, we may be underestimating some of our impacts. So the differential expenditure patterns by the Food Hub farms make a difference. Now, these are sort of all well and good, but how do these compare with sort of what you would think about as other sort of sectors that support Food Hub type functions? And so we pulled up some of these. These are for New York State output multipliers for wholesale trade, transportation, warehousing services, and you can see that the Food Hubs, at least for our case study, has higher multiplier impacts than those that have these sort of separate comparable types of activities. So with a Food Hub that is interested in sourcing on local products, has a higher percentage of expenditures local, you end up seeing relatively stronger multiplier effects than what you would find in traditional sectors with comparable activities. Okay.
So a question just came in. For reference, what's the multiplier for a classic non-local, such as big box retail stores? That is somewhat less comparable than the ones that you just showed.
I'd have to look that up. I think we did some retail, in some related work, I'm trying to remember what the multipliers were for, say, retail food industry, which is maybe retail trade like grocery stores or something, if that's what you're getting at, which tend to be a little bit lower than these, but don't quote me on, I mean, what this was trying to do was trying to compare these multipliers with industries that perform similar functions. I'm not sure that the comparison with sort of a retail grocery is as meaningful, but I might be missing part of the question.
I mean, it might be different if it was a retail grocery, might be Wegmans versus Walmart, right? I mean, I would imagine that there could be a lot of differences depending on what the
And we don't know, with the data that we have, we couldn't distinguish. We couldn't distinguish a Wegmans from a Walmart, right? Unless we got data that on their purchasing patterns as well. Okay, so I mentioned opportunity costs earlier. When we surveyed the downstream buyers of the food, or buyers of the regional access products, we asked, due to their relationship with regional access, did they buy less product from other sources? And about half said they did purchase less, and with an average of amount about 23%. So with this data, we can actually estimate what we're defining as an opportunity cost, saying that for every dollar increase in final demand for the Food Hub products, there's actually 11 cents per dollar offset in other purchases, okay? So not a one-for-one, but that unnetted, it still appears positive, but this is something we need to account for. We need to account for the fact that if they're buying more from their Food Hub, they're buying less from other sources. And we assume for our cases that they're buying less from other wholesale operations, the buyers, okay?
Okay, this is a follow-up to Tom's question. I was thinking the non-local source references like Home Depot, Walmart, car dealer, how low would they be? And again, I don't know, would your answer be the same? Needing data.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the IMPLAN data doesn't have specific sources. In general, if they're sourcing less product locally, they're going to have lower multiplier impact. If they less inputs, if they purchase less of their inputs locally, you have to remember that Home Depot is still, or other still, you know, part of what they do is have local labor. Now we can argue whether their wages are right or not, but that's sort of a locally sourced impact that would have a local impact on the multipliers. But if more of their other inputs, purchases, cost of goods sold, are coming from outside the region, that would have a lower net effect on the multiplier. The data that we have doesn't distinguish by types of that. You could get an estimate at it. If you give me data from Walmart and Home Depot and stuff on their purchasing patterns, we could get an estimate on it. My guess is that's probably not something they're interested in doing. So if we go back to our conceptual, and I'm almost done here. If we go back to our sort of conceptual framework, what we want to do now is actually account for that 11% offset of the original direct effect when we're and recompute our indirect and induced effects. Okay, so the $1 million is impure. We need to basically offset purchases from other sectors that we take out of wholesale trade. So what happens when we do that? As you would expect, the multipliers go down. All right, so this table shows the second row is actually the multipliers when we consider opportunity costs. And you can see that, I think I have a slide on it, that it's about just over a 10% decrease in output multipliers. So when we're looking at these types of analyses, we want to make sure we consider what the potential opportunities costs are. That may vary in different applications that you may be working on. In our case, by talking with buyers of the product, we see this negative offset that we need to consider. One of the important parts of doing these types of analysis is we can actually look at where the value of those indirect and induced effects are. Okay, so this is basically by sector where the indirect and induced effects are. The columns that are blue are indirect, basically business-to-business effects. The portions that are in red are from induced effects or the impact on industries from increasing wage spending. So as you'd expect, the highest indirect impacts are in the areas of the farm and non-farm food purchases. You see the first column that's relatively red is real estate and rental. So what do people do when they have wages? They spend things on like paying for their house, you know, renting an apartment. They buy things such as food. When you'll see they pay for health services. So you see those columns that are actually there with red reflect what you would expect in terms of how people are spending their wages. The large negative impact at the far end, again, is taking that opportunity cost into effect. Okay, so not only is the multiplier important, the point is we can actually talk about where these impacts are distributed among sectors in the economy. Just talked about that and that. If we go and look real quick at a more detailed look at the farm level data we collected, one of the things that we asked was what proportion of their sales at the farm sales are facilitated by the Food Hub, in this case by regional access. And we got a varying response, but what you notice is really what you see is in that sort of mid-scale producer is where we're seeing most of this sort of facilitation of sales, which might be as you would expect if the small-scale producers are focused more on direct marketing activities and the larger-scale producers have some other opportunities available. But we're really seeing the opportunity, again, within this Food Hub at the mid-scale producers. Overall, we asked whether the Food Hub facilitated an expansion of their business, and you can see that for over, 57% actually said that they were able to expand. So there is, we're talking about some opportunity here for scale growth at the farm sector. These are just a couple examples of what some folks have said, that they are able to expand their CSA, grow beyond their local area. We also saw comments that the infrastructure was important within their food hub, that they're able to actually utilize the storage and warehousing capabilities to extend their sales throughout the year.
So there's a couple questions that have come in.
Yep.
One from Tim Martinson, non-farm, non-local. Can you give an example? Are we talking about making jam or canned goods that don't necessarily come from local fruit, or are we talking about industrial products from, say, Cascadian farms?
Non-farm, non-local. Okay, so these would be, either of those could fall into that category. If this is, basically it's manufactured food products, okay, that are sourced from outside of New York State.
Okay, that's the non-local part.
That's the non-local part.
The non-farm part is the manufacturer.
Yeah, the non-farm I meant is basically, the terminology there is kind of confusing. We've been trying to work on that.
All right.
But basically it was non-farm, meaning they're not purchasing raw products from the farm.
And then the second part of that was, conversely, do you have any figures on what Green Star Food Co-op buys locally versus non-locally?
I don't. I'd love to know that, but I don't have specific data from Green Star about that. It'd be another interesting case in terms of at least that sort of retail food service in terms of how much they source locally. Because certainly, again, if they source more locally, everything else held constant, they would have a larger multiplier effect per dollar of output that they sell than would another food retailer.
And Tim goes on to say, are food co-ops in general, and again, that's a data-driven, right? I mean, you need the data in order to figure that out, right? It's
Absolutely.
Not
yeah, I meant.
Okay. Keep the questions coming.
Yeah, keep the questions. I think what I'll try to do is actually skip a little bit. This is just these slides and stuff are going to be available for folks. Just in the interest of time, I'd like to move to the discussion. Point is that there was some scale effects that we saw as purported in the data that we got. So I just have a few sort of closing discussion points, and then hopefully we'll have some more questions. Again, the purpose of this exercise was to promote a methodology, data-driven methodology to evaluate impact of, say, policies that support food hub expansions on local economies and participating farms. We're developing a practitioner's guide right now that's in process with USDA that would say, if you want to go through a similar type of an approach for an existing or potential food hub project, this goes through what's the data that you need and how can you work within the in-plant structure in order to do that.
So if folks want to kind of keep up with when that's available or being able to find it, where would they look to find that? Or
we'll be putting it out as for sure as an extension bulletin out of Dyson. I'll post it on the PWT listserv as well.
Okay.
I'll try to get that word out as much as possible.
Okay, great. Thanks.
In order to do this, again, need to emphasize that there is data, extensive data collected that needs to do, that you need to do. That without doing that, you may underestimate sort of what the local economic impacts are and impacts on the farms. Opportunity costs are important, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. Better understanding the extent to which food hubs affect the overall demand for and consumption of local products was another one of our objectives. Based on our research on at least this potential, on a successful food hub that's been around for a while, we do see that it supported the availability of local products, that they improved, farms reported improved access to freight service, storage, and access to urban markets. Mid-scale farms were shown to be particularly important for these types of services, and customers that we surveyed report expanded access of locally grown fruits through their markets by the access of the food hub. What we don't necessarily know, we just made an assumption that the offset of was through wholesale through the wholesale trade sector, we don't know necessarily the extent of what that was offset of local or non-local purchases. We utilize the default data within in-plan to make that assumption.
And that probably relates to the question that just came in from Jamila. What impact, in your opinion, will food hubs have on local farmers markets?
That's a good question. You know, this is, again, it's an alternative market that producers will either, if they can generate returns that are net returns that are higher, that this would make, at the business level, make sense for them to switch into. There could be. I mean, what we're sort of seeing is, you know, generally the farmers market aren't as much of an outlet for intermediary buy. Yes, there's some chefs that are purchasing at farmers markets, but here again there really is an attention to larger intermediary buyers, either through distributors, through restaurants, through institutions. So to the degree that they compete for markets, we could see some potential cannibalization of sales. Okay. I'm almost out of time. I want to get to some of the implications. Some of the implications that we came up with on this project, particularly in thinking about designing or supporting a food hub initiative, some of the main things that came out were the importance of involving mid-scale producers. Again, seeing that sort of how much sales were facilitated by the food hub. That availability of warehousing and storage capacity was particularly important for these producers, and that there was a diversity of customers, particularly those in urban environments that farmers are less likely to have access to.
So a question just came in from Jonathan Schell. In Oswego County, we have held farmers meetings and done our own feasibility study with farmers. We have a very active group and actually are in the process of developing a business plan and applying for a grant from USDA. Great. Is there any way we can get help from Todd or Becca on our project development or business plan and advising us on our project?
Sure. Depends on what type of, I mean, we could certainly work with you in that advisory capacity. It depends on what you would like to do at this stage in terms of moving your project forward. I mean, are you looking at wanting to develop an impact assessment based on some of the data, some data that you can collect or assume within a proposed food hub structure? There's certainly something we can talk about, and why don't we talk offline about that?
There you go. So Jonathan, follow up with Todd afterwards. That sounds great. And did you have one more slide, or are you all set?
I think most of this I already talked about, the importance of opportunity cost. There's other studies out there that you don't be soul-centered on just one research project. There are some other studies out there in terms of doing feasibility studies that might inform your type of work. And again, the importance is, in this type of an impact assessment, is going beyond just sales of the food hub, that you need to understand the overall extent in terms of these indirect and induced effects in increasing overall sales within the economy. And with that, I will stop.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. I appreciate it, Todd. You're taking some time with us today.
Sure.
And the slides as well as the presentation will be up on our Campus County Connections webinar, and I'll send a link out to everybody to let you know when that's available. Just to take a moment to note that there's some other upcoming Building Campus County Connections webinars in April, May, and June. So take a moment, see if anything applies, and please do to register. If you have questions to follow up with Todd,
please
go ahead.
Send me an email, give me a call.
Yay, excellent. And if you have questions about the series or anything related to connecting or reconnecting with some folks on campus, please do feel free to contact me, Celeste Carmichael. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.